At least 26 people are dead and 26 injured after a plane crash in Indonesia. And the Bank of Montreal is calling for Ottawa to permit the merger of Canadian banks. Otherwise, they won't be internationally competitive. And that's World Report for Thursday, July 17th. I'm Barbara Smith.
Greetings once again, Ontario Morning. A very good morning to you. I'm Joe Cote. Here we are in the third hour of our Thursday morning show. On commentary in just a moment, some thoughts on that crash a year ago today of TWA Flight 800. We'll have a Kingston bit of music from Doug Rainsbury. Floyd Herman is here after the news on the half hour. He'll have his Huron County update. And then we'll meet the baseball poet of southwestern Ontario. "11 minutes before 9 o'clock, and it's Poet Up." There is a certain symmetry to baseball. The field is geometric. So is the scoring. 3 strikes, 3 outs. Lends itself to poetry, you might say. Well, that's what Shel Krakofsky, a family doctor in London, discovered. We sat in his office and talked about free verse and baseball.
No, I've always been interested in baseball, played it, followed it, and then about 10 years ago I started writing about it, and other topics as well, but the baseball poetry seems to garner the most attention.
What kind of writing were you starting with?
Well, I was exploring my Judaism, I was exploring my family, and trying to figure out my roots and where I was going, and baseball popped in as the perfect metaphor, and I've been writing about baseball and many other things since then.
Now, how was baseball the perfect metaphor?
Well, without getting too complex about it...
Oh, get complex.
Okay, I'll get complex. First of all, it's the only sport that combines the best of capitalism with socialism. It's very politically correct. The object of the game is to win, but ultimately everybody gets a chance to contribute in an orderly way through the batting order. It's a very civilized sport. In this age of lost identities, it's the only major team sport where the individual counts. It's not a ball that scores, it's not a puck that scores, it's the individual who scores. The individual counts. And how does the individual score? By the most pristine and beautiful of images. He comes safely home. And that's so much better than the defensive strategies, the militaristic terms that go with sports like football and hockey and basketball, which I like. But baseball is to me the purest of all sports, and it has so many possibilities in terms of interpretation. And as I say, it's a metaphor for life, and I don't want to overdo it, but it's a lot of fun. And I can read you some poems that might show you this.
For example?
Okay. Something as simple as selecting a baseball mitt. Massage the pocket as gently as the nape of a cradled infant's neck. Pound the pocket until your palm stings with joyous pain, soothed by the balm of lush, confident sound, a ball perfectly captured. Walk with it, run with it in every direction. At all speeds, feel the clutch of authority. Toss it to the heavens in triumph. Turf it to the grass in disgust. Prepare yourself for all emotions. Sniff the polished leather like a hunting dog. Paw at the webbing with love and lust. Control the tropism. Take your time. Buying a glove is the same as getting married. You only want to do it once.
Did that come from your own childhood or from observations?
I don't think it came from childhood. I think it came when I was looking at my baseball mitt, my old baseball mitt, and it needed trading in, but it was my childhood mitt, and I remember how carefully I picked it out because we only had X number of dollars, and it lasted me a long, long time. And then when I had to go out to get another one, I'm saying to myself, well, this is going to be the last mitt I ever get. And I was very, very careful, and I thought of my wife. We've been married for 25 years, and, I think people should select their spouses with the care they put into buying their baseball mitts, and that's where this poem came from.
Do you still play some ball?
I used to play some slow pitch, but I find I've slowed down to the point, and there's no such thing as a slower pitch, so I'm out of the league.
When you said you were searching for your own roots and baseball and poetry helped you with that, what did you find in your search?
Well, I can go back to actually an earlier book. I've got it right here. And this was actually the first baseball metaphor poem I wrote, and I found it worked. And it's called A Runner at First. Not created to hit home runs, the Jew is always a runner at first. He waits for signs and signals, inching off the bag, playing his own game with the pitcher. Wanting to be ignored, hoping to be seen, he frets over his leadoff, afraid of being picked off. He raced with a flick of the wrist. Having learned to hold little faith in the batter, he takes his own chances to advance, wondering eternally how to arrive safely at the place called home.
Nice.
Glad you like it.
Don't see a lot of baseball stuff on the walls of your doctor's surgery here.
No, well, we're in my office. At home, I actually have a shrine, a wall covered with everything from a Sandy Koufax signed autograph picture to an opening Blue Jay ticket that I was there, and a wonderful thing that a friend gave me. He was there, a field from left field, from Field of Dreams, from the movie set, and that's a lovely thing to have. So, yeah, we have a lot of things at home. And
how did you get Sandy Koufax to sign something?
Well, I think he signed it for money. I bought it from a memorabilia place.
Okay.
It's not a personal contact. I wish it were. There's one I'd like to read for you because it's part of my life living in the country. We live in Komoka, which is about 10 miles west of London. And I wrote this originally for my late father-in-law, Min Suzuki, who built our screen door. It's called Wood Sounds. Baseball. Man's only other perfect creation is the wooden screen door, framing the flawless and seamless right-angled weave that allows fair air in and keeps foul pests out. No need for buzzers here, the arrivals and departures announced only by the summer sentry, clapping open and closed. Aluminum doors and bats reserved for artificial homes and turf. Children play baseball outside on grass, to the chirp and buzz of spectator birds and insects. I hear a wooden sound, serenely unsure if it's the clean crack of a clean hit or somebody at the door.
That's timeless. I guess baseball is too, and so are screen doors.
Yes, I think so. I just find it so civilizing and contemplative, like poetry. It's the pauses that count, and most of baseball is made up of pauses. It's what's going on between the lines, just as what's going on in between the lines of poetry. They're very contemplative, as I say, and the game is so full of ritual and tradition and nuance. The nuance is incredible. A small thing like the Blue Jays catcher, Charlie O'Brien. And I have to look very closely, but every time he goes up to bat, he takes his bat and hits the opposing catcher's shin pad, just as a sign of respect. This is, we're in this together, Chief, even though we're on opposing teams. Watch for it next time. One of the most beautiful things, and I never saw this, but after the 93 World Series, I was listening to the baseball game, and I can't remember whether it was Tom or Jerry described this, but it was the first time Jimmy Key, who was still a Blue Jay at the time, would face Dave Winfield, who was traded away to the Cleveland Indians. And the first time Dave Winfield came up to bat, Key looked at him, tipped his hat. Winfield paused, tipped it back. and then he threw the pitch. I never saw it, but I would have cried right on the spot. You don't get that in any other sport.
Shel, thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for coming.
Dr. Shel Krakofsky, the baseball poet. He has a family practice in London. He lives in Komoka. His latest book of poems is called Blind Messiah, published by Moonstone Press.
Nine o'clock. Good morning. I'm Anuba Perret. There are more problems this morning aboard the Mir space station. The orbit.
Right now in London, it's 5 degrees. I'll have more information at 10 o'clock. I'm Heather Koch, 6X News.
This is Cabbages and Kings. Hello, I'm Sheila Martindale. My guest today is Shel Krakofsky. Welcome to 6X, Shel.
Nice to be here, Sheila.
Shel, we'd like to hear some of your poems, but before we do that, perhaps you'd be good enough to tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your background and the kind of things that you're writing?
Well, my background is, my first name is Old English. My last name is New Polish.
Okay.
My heritage is Jewish. My wife's heritage originally is Japanese, and we were both born and brought up in Canada.
Well, that's an interesting combination.
Dahlia and I have 3 children. We have a son, Noah, 15. We have a daughter, Rivka, who was 13, and another daughter, Shira, who was 11.
Mm-hmm. Nice family. And by profession, you are a physician, right?
Yes, I am a physician.
So you're a physician first and a poet second. Do we have to put it in that order?
It depends on what day you hit me. Right now I'm a poet.
Okay, now I have heard you read your poems and enjoyed them very much. I don't think I've seen anything of yours in print, but you are also a short story writer, aren't you?
Yes, I've had a few short stories published, both here and in the United States. And to date, I've had about 9 poems published, all in Canada.
Okay, well, that's a good beginning because, as our listeners probably by now know, it's not easy getting poetry published. And so we'll look forward perhaps in the future to a book. When that happens, you'll have to come back and we'll talk about that. But meanwhile, perhaps you'd like to begin with one of your poems, and if you feel that you want to say a few words about it first or afterwards, then do feel free.
Well, the first poem I'd like to read is for my son, Noah. Noah has Down syndrome. He's our oldest child. And in the Jewish religion, at age 13, you become what is called a bar mitzvah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm sure our listeners are familiar with that.
And it is both a, I guess, pubescent rite of passage, but it's also a religious rite of passage in which you become, quote-unquote, a man.
Right.
I wrote this poem for Noah after his bar mitzvah, when he learned in Hebrew the appropriate prayers, and kept the congregation spellbound. And
good.
So I'm going to read this to my son Noah. If you are wondering why you look more like some of your classmates than you do like your sisters, it is because seas are split and smaller things are sometimes forgotten, like your undivided extra 21st chromosome, which has given you the gorgeous Eastern look that is Oriental on Oriental. You are my oldest child and will always be our youngest. Love us more than we know how to return. Teach us more than we can learn. The important things you mastered long before all of us, and the less important still gets integrated. Well, just more slowly, as you frolic into the future unafraid. When you recited the bar mitzvah brachot to a hushed congregation, we felt our own fate draped with your talit on those noble shoulders. And when your man-child's voice delivered us all in triumph, the cries you heard were those of newborns. You, Noah, console the doubters, you messenger of God, Gabbai of our shul, guardian of our Sabbath, herald of our Havdalah. It is you, Noah, who navigates the ark that saves us, as we continually come to you in twos, the part of us with faith, the part of us with fear.
That's absolutely beautiful. it's wonderful to hear such a positive tone in regard to a situation like this, and I think everybody should listen to that poem. Certainly anybody who is facing the same kinds of situation that you and your wife faced, shall we say, 15 years ago. That is really beautiful. Enjoyed it.
I can tell you that after I wrote it, I sat Noah down and I read it to him, and as tears came to my eyes, he giggled, which is Noah.
Which is Noah. His understanding of the deep thoughts that you have there would be not as advanced as yours, of course.
Noah's correct. He thinks he's normal. And
yes. Well, that's wonderful.
That's why he giggled.
So he has a good understanding of himself, a good esteem of himself.
Absolutely. Emotionally, he's absolutely normal.
Great.
And he's a good boy.
It's good that you can write poems about things that affect your life. Some people are not able to do that. Do you find that this is good poetically, personally, a bit of both?
Well, you've answered the question. Yes. 2 of the above.
Right, 2 of the above, all of the above.
Yes.
Okay, good. What else have you got for us?
Well, the next poem I'm going to read is called Apikoros on Ice. It requires a couple of explanatory terms, which in Hebrew I will translate for you. Apikoros means somebody who goes out of the faith, converts out of the faith.
Is that a Jewish word?
Apikoros, yes. And a Bal Tshuva is somebody who comes back into the faith.
I think you already used that word in the last poem.
Not Bal Tshuva, no.
Something that sounded like
no, you heard that at my last reading, actually.
Oh, okay. Sorry, getting mixed up here.
Yeah, that's fine. And this poem is called Apikoros on Ice. I wrote it a couple of years ago after I retired from what is disparagingly or sometimes affectionately called old-timers hockey. And I found my legs were failing me, and it was time to start acting my age. And,
the body was telling you to stop now.
Yes, before I got hurt.
And as a doctor, of course, you were sensible to listen to that.
Well, don't think it had anything to do with medicine.
Oh.
I just hurt. This poem is called Apikoros on Ice. None of my True North beer-guzzling buddies called to change my mind, so the retirement from hockey is final. My unwelcome legs tangled in the tefillin straps of time. I have become a lapsed Canadian. Their guts enlarge with nothing else to do. No faster, no better. Just as old, just as slow. I still have my pride. They cling to old lies invented and retold, pouring back suds and laughing that my timing was overdue. No loss to them. My sluggish skates no longer able to flash on milky sheets of ice. Yes, an insult no longer required for one of their late-night minions. They won't call again. Their way of treating an Apikoros. Another minor leaguer, the Baal Shem Tov, glided in snowy woods and coached a team of darkly uniformed players who will take me back, singing and dancing that this Narishkeit is forgiven. Return, they chant, and take up their game. Jews don't play hockey. Bal Tshuvas don't write poems either.
Well, it's quite obvious, Shel, that you are an interesting mixture of a lot of different things here. And hockey is very Canadian.
Yes.
And your spiritual...
Unfortunately, it's become very Russian, too.
Yes, well, I suppose so. And what about Polish? Do they play hockey in Poland at all?
I think when Canadians think of Polish people playing hockey, it's another Polish joke.
Oh, is it?
They're not very good at it.
I'm sure that we have some people of Polish descent playing in the hockey leagues here, though, haven't we?
Oh, yes, but they're Canadians.
But they're Canadians,
yes,
right.
I have no knowledge of any Polish national playing in the National Hockey League.
No, I suppose not. Well, anyway, it's interesting the way that you are putting the different facets of your life together. I think this is a sign of a very integrated person, if I may say so.
Well,
I'm sure it's true. It seems to me that if you can balance your life in this way, that it's very healthy.
Well, if you think so, try this next poem.
Okay, let's try it.
I'll explain one term. It's called Zeta. Zeta is a term of endearment in Yiddish for grandfather.
Okay.
This next poem is called Babel. When Zeta didn't want me to understand, he spoke Yiddish. And when I learned Yiddish, he would speak Polish. And when I got older, in order to confound him, I used French, as my properly schooled children now use Hebrew to keep things from me. And when I talk to them in perfect English about where we can speak their secret tongue all day long, they still don't understand.
Yes, your family poems are good. I was going to say nice. Nice is an awful word, but I like the feeling that you have there. Writing poems for members of your family and about them, and what I liked about that one is it's clever too. I think I could say that about all your poems. They have an intellectual stimulation, which is good. So your family poems are not just feelings about your family, but you bring in a lot of other things too. And
well, thank you.
And I enjoy that really. What else have you got?
The next poem is called Camouflage. It involves another part of myself. I went actually with our family about a year ago to Israel.
Was that your first visit?
No, I've been there on 4 occasions.
Oh, right. I remember you told me you were working on a kibbutz at one time.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And my wife has been there twice, but as a family, this was our first time together.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote
quite a project.
Yes, it was. But it was Israel's much safer than the press says it is. And
is that true?
Okay. Oh, absolutely. It's a wonderful place to tour. And I wrote a short poem on my feelings arriving in Jerusalem. It's called Camouflage. Returning, I remove the reversible coat I find necessary all year and immerse myself in the cleansing air to bathe naked in Jerusalem. Shivering comfortably and unseen, I finally dress and discover both sides of my cover are different and exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. I think probably a lot of people would identify with that poem who have roots elsewhere than here.
Exactly.
It's a poem about going home and or going to your spiritual roots, whatever. And there is an ambivalence, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely.
And especially when you have so many different elements to your background. You have different feelings about all of them, and well,
I think in Canada all of us have different roots.
Most of us came originally from somewhere else.
Well, everybody came from somewhere else. All of us actually are hyphenated Canadians.
Yes.
Anytime I hear somebody say I am a Canadian, I get scared a little
which
bit.
Brand of Canadian?
Well, when they're willing to tell me the hyphen, then I feel more comfortable. But
yes.
I find that the biggest bigots in the world are the people who don't acknowledge that roots came from somewhere else. And we're very fortunate in Canada to be a mosaic rather than the forced melting pot of the United States.
I think so. I really agree with that. And we do emphasize our cultural differences and at the same time preserve them, and also at the same time sort of try and integrate them into something that says we're Canadian.
Exactly.
But I like the way it's done.
And I think the diversity in Canada is Canadian, rather than one particular image of a Mountie or Nelson Eddy singing some songs.
That's true, and I don't want to get political here, but I don't know how much of this is going to remain once the free trade comes in and maybe we're taken over by Big Brother south of the border.
Well, let me just say that some of my best dollars are Americans.
Okay.
I don't know enough about free trade. I really don't. I think it's a very emotional issue, and until we start seeing things in the newspapers as to what is involved,
we have to be able to grasp the issues before we can comment, really.
Nothing in life is free.
No. Free gift, free lunch, you know what?
Nor is trade, so I don't like the term anyway. But
no, I don't.
I have no poem on that.
No poem on free trade. Well, you still have poems on a number of other topics, and maybe you could, give us something else at this point?
I'll stay in Israel for a second,
sure.
And this is called Letter to My Israeli Cousin. So how's it going, eh? You only sounded so-so. The sweat saturated your last letter, you working so hard, trying to make it down there in the desert. Making it bloom, eh? On your broken back, tilling your sand. My soil, eh? The kids sound great, though. When do they start the army? For a few years? When do you get to see them? On some sort of visitor's day? My children are enjoying the Boy Scouts and the Girl Guides, although I can tell, I hate all the driving. Me? The money keeps ringing up like a taximeter, and my neighbors are certainly friendlier than yours. Anyway, I keep defending your right to bring up your kids on that inherited land. Not to worry. I write letters to the editor and send you money, well, indirectly, through the local charity heavies. They're downright hospitable in this sanitarium called Canada. Take good care of me and hardly ever call you a carpetbagger or complain much about my condition. My family, though, may succumb to consumption here. We all take our chances, eh?
Oh, now that's a little bit of a different tone. I detect a little bit of anger there, which I think is probably a good thing.
Yeah, and some guilt.
And some guilt, right. And I presume that this is not a letter to a particular person.
It actually is.
Oh, is that right?
I do have a cousin in Israel who has a very poor back, who I actually spoke to yesterday.
Oh.
And he works in the deep south of the Negev, trying to make a living. And he was born and raised in Canada, graduated from the University of Toronto.
Oh, and it was his choice to go there and live.
And live.
And does he like it, really?
Yes.
And he wouldn't come back?
Well, he would come back if he's forced to, but he'd prefer living there.
He'd prefer living there? Well,
absolutely.
Good for him.
He's fluent in English and Hebrew, and he's quite satisfied there, but he does have a bad back, and that's the one thing that may force him to come back to Canada, because desk jobs, as you can understand, are not that many in Israel.
No, I imagine that...
So he is a farmer.
Yes.
And we keep in touch quite often.
Well, that's good, and I'm glad, it puts us in perspective for us to hear you talk about people having everyday jobs and kids and one thing and another, and things not being quite as we read them in the paper, although I'm sure that element is there too.
Oh, of course.
Anyhow, at this point, I should remind our listeners that they are tuned in to Cabbages and Kings on 6X FM here in London, 106.9, and that we are speaking with Shel Krakofsky, London poet and physician. And Shel, I know you have a lot of different poems about a lot of different topics, and some of them you're probably not going to get into today, but what else have you got lined up for us?
Well, I have a poem here that's a year old that I wrote and sent to Elie Wiesel shortly after he was declared the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. This poem is called Danger, No Explosives, to Elie Wiesel. Lay the prize on the tracks, a hollow wreath from those fawning tuxedo selectors who now buy their peace with his profits, and didn't sully their gloved hands 4 decades ago to have given instead from Alfred Nobel to Elie Wiesel his dynamite sticks to have blown to hell the tracks to Auschwitz.
Ooh. Now we're getting into the heavies. Well, are we? Or I think we're not going to get into the really heavy stuff, though. I know I have heard quite a lot of your Holocaust poems, and you did tell me that you were not planning to bring those today.
No.
Because they sort of bring up a lot of emotion and stuff that perhaps is better left alone in this particular
Off the airwaves, anyway.
Off the airwaves, yes. Right.
But I do have one more, and it's called Northern Justice, and it involves a retrial that will be coming up in early January.
And when you say Northern Justice, does that require some explanation?
No, the poem will speak for itself.
Thank you.
When Herr Zundel's released body is found again in a beaver court, and his alleged humane crime reviewed because it never happened in the first place due to a technicality of genteel justice, maybe his smiling stiff salute will remind we fair-minded Canadians of some gassed Jews who had no appeal.
Yeah.
And
touché.
I think I better get a little lighter at this point.
Well, yes, okay. I know that these things, they are very emotional. You, of course, would not have been directly involved in the Second World War. You're obviously far too young for that. But
well, I was, in a way. My father served in the Canadian Army, and so from that point of view, yes, I was involved. And from the other point of view, my mother lost half her family to the Germans and Hitler. So that's still with me.
Of course, I understand that it's a very emotional issue, and when I say that you yourself were not directly involved, I mean not in body.
No.
I was certainly in spirit.
Exactly.
And I think it's good that we do have poets who write about these things. We shouldn't be allowed to forget. And of course, I don't know if Irving Layton is one of your mentors, but certainly he does address this topic also. And
yes.
in a tone of voice that, again, doesn't allow us to forget. He's very strong on this, and I think it's good. Sometimes people say, I get tired of hearing about the Holocaust, but on the other hand, we need to be told about it. We don't need to forget it. We don't need to be blasé about it. And so it's good that writers do keep it in front of us once in a while. But as you say, we're going to lighten up and do something else a little bit different from now on.
Yes. This has to do with high school. And I grew up in Toronto, and this is the longest dedication I've ever written in a poem.
Or Trana, as the case might be.
Yeah, Trana, right.
Trana.
You can tell I don't live there anymore. I've been in London, 17 years now.
So now you can pronounce it properly.
Or improperly.
Whatever.
This is for Frida at Forest Hill, Brenda at Bathurst Heights, Vivian at Vaughan, Marilyn at Mackenzie, but to absolutely nobody at Bloor Collegiate, my home room, where the choices were great, but unfortunately, trafe. This poem is called School Days.
That's the dedication?
Yes.
The dedication sounds as if it might be almost as long as the poem.
Almost. School Days. Your kids I've seen, and they're nothing I would have liked to produce. Nothing like me. Lots like you. We were neither lousy lovers nor even friendly friends, just clumsy escorts. A pair of Toronto tickets required for admission before you finally bolted the door after the last of our blind dates. Though to this day I remain convinced, if you had granted me one more night, I could at least have turned you into one of my better poems.
Nostalgia is a good topic for poetry, isn't it? Memories, making something of them, and embellishing, embroidering.
Exactly, embellishing. That poem is all embellishment. None of those girls exist.
No, I think we have to understand this, and this is something, that the public at large very often doesn't know, that poetry has a large element of imagination and fantasy in it, and people seem to think that every single line of a poem is gospel truth, and of course it isn't. But it's very difficult for poets to sometimes justify what they have written in terms of their personal lives. And it is a myth that I think every once in a while needs exploding.
But I do, though, believe that all fantasy is based on experience. At some point.
Yes, and feelings, they can be placed in different areas, but sure, there's a reality somewhere there. Anyhow, what else have you got for us?
I will read you some baseball poems.
Okay, we've had hockey and
baseball is my favorite sport.
Hockey is a second in line, or what?
Oh, absolutely. Hockey is fun to play, but baseball is much more gentle. It's played on a field. You're not as cold.
Very true. Very true.
The fans are much tamer. The object is to knock nobody over.
Right. Not so much body contact.
Yes, and they actually shake hands after games.
Oh, wonderful.
Often. Not always, but often.
Well, that's very comforting to know.
So what I'll read is actually my very first published, well, if you don't count high school yearbook, my first published poem.
Oh, okay, let's hear it.
It's called A Runner at First. Not created to hit home runs, the Jew is always a runner at first. He waits for signs and signals, inching off the bag, playing his own game with the pitcher. Wanting to be ignored, hoping to be seen, he frets over his leadoff, afraid of being picked off, erased with a flick of the wrist. Having learned to hold little faith in the batter, he takes his own chances to advance, wondering eternally how to arrive safely at the place called home.
Okay. That's a baseball poem, and it's also about other things as well.
Yes, you can
read anything into that.
Exactly. And the word Jew could be replaced by individual.
Yes.
We're all runners at first.
We are all, I think.
Very few of us are blessed to be home run hitters.
A lot of people do say that baseball is a reflection of life, and I suppose, when you really think about it, that's true.
Well, you're probably more familiar with cricket.
Not really, you
No?
know. So I was called upon a few weeks ago to explain the rules of cricket to somebody, and it was a game that I didn't know a whole lot about, even when I lived in England. And, trying to explain the intricacies of bowling a maiden over to somebody who hadn't a clue what I was talking about was quite interesting. Anyhow, I think I know as much about baseball as I do about cricket.
Well, then let me read you my next poem. which is the shortest one you're going to hear from me today.
Okay.
It's called An Outfielder Teaches Life's Secret.
Sounds like a wonderful title.
Play deep. It's easier to run forward than it is to run backward. And maybe that sums up why I think baseball is the metaphor of life.
Yes, I think it is. Of course, I'm a tennis player myself, and I think you could use the same allusion there, because if you play on the baseline, you can always run to the net, but if you play the net, it's much harder to run back to the baseline.
Time for you to write a poem, Sheila.
Well, maybe, but I'm just too interested in listening to everybody else's at the moment than I am to write my own. So we've probably, Shel, got time for 3 or 4 more poems. So, we can keep going for a little while yet. I hope you've brought more with you.
Yes, I have a few, and I'll read a couple more that are baseball, but baseball being a metaphor, not really about baseball.
Right.
This one is called Wood Sounds. Baseball. Man's only other perfect creation is the wooden screen door, framing the flawless and seamless right-angled weave that allows fair air in and keeps foul pests out. No need for buzzers here. The arrivals and departures announced only by the summer sentry, clapping open and closed. Aluminum doors and bats reserved for artificial homes and turf. Children play baseball outside on grass to the chirp and buzz of spectator birds and insects. I hear a wooden sound, serenely unsure if it's the clean crack of a clean hit or just somebody at the door.
I like that one.
Oh, I'm glad.
Is it an appropriate moment to ask what you think about organized sports for kids? I mean, is it good or bad, or does it have nothing to do with what we're talking about?
Well, I'll tell you quickly, I think organized sports for kids are tremendous if they're organized by the kids and keep the parents away.
Okay, that says it all.
I've been to too many hockey games when I've seen parents behaving like the worst possible of morons.
Yes,
and,
well, I do know what you mean, and it's unfortunate, but I think it's inevitable in some ways.
Let the kids play themselves.
Great, wonderful. What else have you?
Just a game of catch, a little more wistful.
Okay.
On that playful sunny day, without our clouds or anybody's shadow, when nothing was important and everything seemed possible, for a few moments we basked in private afterglows, now etched barely in vapor. As we used the ball, we lobbed back and forth, to keep our distance, and only made contact without ever touching.
I think you've got a whole manuscript here of life and baseball poems. And
that's the end of my baseball poems.
It's the end of it. Okay.
We've only got a couple of minutes, so I'll
That's right. Yes, you've been watching the clock, so that's true. We are getting down to the wire here. So if you've got a couple that you'd like to finish up with, now's the time to bring them out.
I'll read 3 more. How's that sound?
Sure.
Okay. This next one is dedicated to a friend, Michael Lefko, who's an avid bicycle rider, and this is called Riders on the Outskirts. The bike riders cycle with tight black pants and tighter white helmets. They jockey for position in fluid formations, constantly weaving their voices in places like honking Canada geese. A mobile tapestry, each becomes the leader for a moment, followers forever, pedaling their casual fury towards a brighter sun. And whenever they accelerate, no matter the direction, it's always against the wind.
We could get into a lot of philosophy over that, but let's not. Let's just hear the rest of the poems that you have brought. And
I'll give you 2 more.
Okay.
And then you can play your theme song.
All right.
This next one is called Revelation. Making something from nothing is a heavenly attribute, not a poet's alchemy. Don't trust the poets or their drum thumpers who cloak themselves as modern prophets. The only thing divine about poets is that, like God, whenever we reveal anything, we find new ways of hiding ourselves.
Okay, it's a new thought.
And the last poem I'll read is appropriately called Last Lines.
Very appropriate.
Last lines. It's a waste to index the first lines. It's the last lines of poetry that count, not the first. It's the last lines that should be remembered, not the first. Truth is at the end, not at the start. On Yom Kippur, at Armageddon, in business, in prayer, in poetry, in death, in love. It's the last lines that count, not the first.
Shel Krakofsky, thank you very much for joining us on Cabbages and Kings.
It was my pleasure.
I'm Sheila Martindale.
This is 106.9 6X FM.